people love the celebrity stuff, and I think we know. Oh, excuse me. I'm sorry. Did we interrupt you on the bike ride there, Rich? Were you just cruising past?
My ski helmet, Michael.
Oh, it's a ski helmet. I thought you were just generally clumsy, and you thought it'd be safe to wear that indoors.
Well, I am. But
Okay.
by the way, if I got sued every time I ran into somebody on a ski slope, I'd be bankrupt by now.
So
hang on, I got something for this. He's in the ozone.
Oh, okay. Don't get into the ozone when you're talking about Gwyneth Paltrow, because that's not family-friendly stuff there, and somebody's going to have to Google that to figure out what we're talking about. We don't have time for that frivolity here today. So, are you suggesting, Rich, that perhaps helmets would have affected the outcome in this case, or the injuries claimed?
No, I think pretty clearly they were both wearing helmets, and I don't think that affected.
How do you do that and not mess up your hair?
How do you do that? Your hair
that
stays
is fascinating. In fact, some might say you have a helmet, hair, and a helmet on top of the hair. It's amazing. That's
I have
bulletproof.
protection under my protection.
That's bulletproof. Okay, so let me ask you this, Joseph. This was a case in which it was truly a he said, she said. That whole animation that we saw blew me away just because it's total BS. I mean, nobody could confirm all of those positions, locations, the contact between them. It was all based on, this is what I recall. This is what I recall. There's no forensics of the scene. There's no tracks. What do you think about that animation and how I think it probably helped the the defendant tremendously?
Yeah, it's something that's conjured up essentially in a digital environment. You can say anything, whether or not you're going to get away with it and how much latitude you're going to be given by the court. That's something different, but you can at least throw this out there. You can make this supposition. And at the end of the day, it didn't wash and it didn't make sense, relative to what they're opining about the biomechanics of this event. There's too many things that, Michael, just didn't marry up in this case. And I think that the jury is thinking, I don't know if the word frivolous came to mind with them. I know that's a dangerous word in legal parlance, but it just didn't seem to make sense. It didn't wash.
Yeah, I think a lot of folks would agree that this would never have seen trial but for the parties involved. One kind of bullheaded dude, and then a celebrity allegedly with a lot of money. So, hey, I want to use this as a teaching moment, if you guys will bear with me just a moment here. There's a concept called the thin-skulled plaintiff or the eggshell plaintiff, and that involves a case, and they never got to that in this case because the jury never got to damages. But at a certain point, they might have had to apportion damages. And as you know, Mr. Sanderson had a history of all kinds of problems. That doesn't mean that the defendant gets off if truly found responsible. They just have to apportion. So here you have, can you see this? That's the eggshell plaintiff that's perfectly 100% good going into whatever the event was, okay? He's fine. Oh, darn. Oh, look at that is nasty. But now afterwards, you can't see. Oh, there you go. He's not doing so well. 100% of whatever those injuries caused by the defendant would be on of the defendant. That's it. But if you have the eggshell plaintiff, who in this case is like Mr. Sanderson, can you see he's unhappy already? He's already got some problems. So if he smashes and his head is cracked open, as it was, it seems, in this case, from whatever source, jury didn't think it was Ms. Paltrow, then they've got to apportion. They've got to decide how much of his current state is caused from pre-existing conditions versus the incident claimed in court. In this case, like I said, they never got to it because they didn't find liability. But hey, I never overlooked the opportunity to use some cracked eggs. So I hope we all learned something from that. Hey, Rich, anything to add to this decision? Did the jury get it right?
Yeah, I think the jury got it right. It was certainly the decision I was expecting. They had a long jury form, 3 pages, with a number of questions. They ultimately could have gotten into whether or not the fall actually caused any of his injuries and what that was worth, but they didn't get past the first question. The first question was, did Gwyneth Paltrow cause the accident? And they said no. And so they had to skip a whole lot of that verdict sheet. And then they determined, did Terry Sanderson cause the accident? Yes. But for her, they only had to figure out whether or not to give her $1. The whole attorney's fees issue is going to be the subject of separate proceedings before the court. I don't think it's been decided that she gets attorney's fees, or certainly how much the attorney's fees would be. The American rule, as we call it, is that in most cases, each side pays their own attorney's fees, even the winning side. So she's not necessarily getting a big check on attorney's fees. But this decision by this jury was in accord with the evidence as I saw it.
Yeah, and I think, Joseph, you deal with a lot of bodies and personalities. I don't mean bodies as in deceased. I think, as usual, it comes down to likability to a great degree. I don't think Sanderson's a very likable dude. I just think he came off as a little histrionic. And whether you like a celebrity or not, Paltrow presents well. How important do you think it was, the likability factor here?
No, I think it's probably very significant. And again, this case is out of the norm. Well, I don't know. We go back to Johnny Depp. Just in these past few months, we've seen celebrity on stand, and more than some of us would have liked. And now, you have this other one, this other case that involves celebrity. So he did come across as not quite as likable. I don't know if curmudgeon is necessarily the case, but I think, you mentioned histrionics. One of the things that really struck me about this case, and I'd love to hear Rich's thoughts about this from an evidentiary standpoint, was this idea about the news circulating around the slopes, that she was on the slopes and that there was an awareness prior to this event occurring. And to me, that played a part in this, and certainly played a part, I think, at least, in what the jury thought moving forward in this case. It kind of traveled, according to what they were saying, kind of traveled like wildfire, around the slopes, and that she was on the slope. So it gives a really bad impression, to say the least.
Yeah, it almost makes it sound like somebody might be targeting, hey, there's a celebrity out here. Let's, let's see if we can get into some kerfuffle with her. There were some high points in this trial. We're going to talk about them in a minute. I'm thinking of things like Paltrow's talking about, I missed a half a day skiing. And she almost made it sound like it was a wannabe sexual assault. It was odd. So stay where you are, guys. We're going to come back after this quick break.
Yes.
We kept skiing.
Right.
We went to the right.
Yes.
We came crashing down together.
That's right.
Okay. You said this man was behind me on the mountain. My knee and our skis were still sort of tangled up.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Is that yes?
Yes. Sorry.
Okay. Our bodies were almost spooning, and I moved away quickly.
Yes.
And my knee splayed open, and I was completely in shock.
Yes.
Okay. All right. I'm going to stop there.
Okay.
And if the court and Ms. Paltrow, if you don't mind, since, again, when we did this over Zoom, would you mind stepping down and us kind of acting this out a little bit so I could get a good feel?
Let's see. Can we approach Your Honor?
And scene. Okay, so we know she's an Academy Award-winning actress, but she comes off believably, I think, although Joseph Scott Morgan, Rich Schoenstein, her sexualizing the ski accident was just plain bizarre to me. Rich, do you think it's just because it's part of her makeup as an actress, and that, maybe it's just over dramatic in terms of how she perceived what happened? It just seemed a little weird.
I think we sort of blew it out of proportion, Michael. She said she had this fleeting thought in her mind that maybe she was being assaulted. I think she was just trying to figure out in that moment what was happening. And, ask women in this country what they have to put up with on a day-to-day basis if they think it's realistic that she might have considered that for a moment. I didn't have any problem with that whatsoever. What I found much more significance is what I'd call the present sense impression of the parties. After they fell down, his immediate reaction was, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. And her immediate reaction was to yell at him for running into her. That was their immediate reaction to the collision. And I found that fact extremely compelling.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. That's, logic. And as we say, to the jury members, don't check your common sense at the door. I was hoping that we would still be in the deliberation, so I could say for Ms. Paltrow, what's most important was who's in the box. But my apologies to Seven. If you haven't seen that movie, I don't think I've spoiled it all for you. Joseph, so in terms of evidence of this kind of negligence, and that's what we're talking about, it's a civil case. What do you think the plaintiff would have needed to tip the scale in his favor?
Well, I think that he would have in an acute stage, and that means in the immediate moments afterwards, he would have needed to have demonstrated some kind of real compromised physiological reaction that he had, and maybe anatomically, where he is literally suffering from whiplash, where he might have some type of muscle torn, any kind of dislocation that may have occurred in his upper body, and a true concussion. Remember, that's, we got into quite the debate with the neurologist. We witnessed that on the stand. And, and they went back and forth, and he seemed like at that moment in time, people that were doing the assessment, and this came out later, that he was alert, oriented to time and space, those sorts of things. And it just doesn't necessarily match up or marry up with what he was holding forth. And they say these things happened, that you can have these events that occur, down the road, and listen, from personal experience, playing football and being out on the streets, I've had 5 concussions in my life.
That explains
a lot.
James.
See, I stole it. Gotcha. And in those moments, in my personal experiences, I was disoriented to time and space, and had to go, through extensive treatment for that, and CTs and all those sorts of things. In the acute phase, you don't really see that with this. That's why, my smell meter kind of went off with this case to begin with, when they began to get off into the weeds about what, had occurred these many days after the initial event.
Yeah, and we're talking, 7 years actually passed since then. So now here's the guy on the stand. The jury is evaluating him, an 8-person jury, by the way, which is a little odd. So they needed 6 out of 8 to come to a decision. And so they're looking at this guy. They're sizing him up, Joseph, as you suggest. So let's look at some of Terry Sanderson's testimony.
I just remember everything was great, and then I heard something I've never heard at a ski resort, and that was a blood-curdling scream. And that's an important point. My skis are still on. They're still on. And I'm thinking, I got to placate this guy. He's really mad. If he decided he wanted to jump on me right now, he could finish me off. I remember saying, I'm sorry.
Okay, now you're
Twice.
whispering.
I know I am,
but
because that's what I heard. Nothing was coming out. My lips were moving, my tongue was moving. There was nothing coming out of my mouth, and my heart rate went up again.
Okay. It looked like what you were mouthing was, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. And I was just going, I can't believe it. I thought, try again. I'm sorry. Nothing was coming out. And to me, I heard that.
So Terry Sanderson, there's the loser, both on his complaint and on the cross complaint by Gwyneth Paltrow. The guy, hey, I'm sorry you lose. You're too smarmy. You're articulate for a guy with brain damage from an accident. And I don't believe you. Joseph Scott Morgan's here, Rich Schoenstein, both taking this in as we got the verdict just yesterday after 2 hours, 20 minutes of intense effort by the jury. Rich, thoughts on this guy?
So, Michael, the problem with this case at its core is that his story makes absolutely no sense and is not believable. Let's start with the idea that Gwyneth Paltrow let out a blood-curdling scream on her way down the mountain before she hit him, supposedly. Doesn't make any sense, not believable, nobody else testified to that. Then he says he was hit so far, he kind of flew through the air, he ended up face down, splayed out over the snow, but his skis didn't come off. And anybody who skis knows that's not how a serious ski accident works. If you fall that hard, your skis come off. Nobody else said he was face down with his head pointed down. That didn't make any sense. And then he has this testimony about the ski instructor coming over and yelling at him. And we got to meet Eric Christensen. He testified at this trial. And the last thing you would think after hearing him testify is that he came over and yelled at this guy on the slope. That didn't hold out at all.
You know, it didn't come up during the trial, but, you know, this was a beginner slope. And to your point about the skis normally releasing, anybody knows as a beginner, you're probably either renting or you bought them with that in mind. They make those bindings so loose that they'll come off if you sneeze, because they're trying to protect the skier from breaking an ankle by binding too tightly. So you're right. I mean, if what he suggests happened, those skis would have been long gone from his feet. Hey, Joseph, you know, we're going to see some of this animation here coming up here real quick. Give me your take on the variables that need to be included. You know, this was a demonstrative, this is, you know, confusing for the jury. It's a demonstrative exhibit, right? It's not evidence. But how did they look at it any other way when they put all these factors together and say, look at this movie about what happened?
Yeah, and the thing about it, you said it, movie, it's very impressive to a jury that's sitting there, you know, and they're thinking, well, they've gone to all of this trouble to create this. And, you know, when you look at it, it's quite marvelous to see. You know, it's got all the little details. It's even got the slope in there. You can get an idea of the elevation, perhaps. You see that it's rather broad. But, you know, what you're failing to see, I think, for instance, if we were to examine a motor vehicle accident, you don't get a lot of the feel here for, say, for instance, the kind of, in a lateral perspective, this kind of motion that goes into it, the point of contact, all of those issues, because what you're trying to prove here is that there was some kind of physical damage that was sustained on the part of the plaintiff here. And one other thing, if I could just kind of interject this, I find it interesting that this man that's suffering from this egregious head injury has the wherewithal to recall that this man, he even phrased it as bullying. You know, he has that kind of recall at this moment when this occurred. And I got to tell you, reflectively, regarding concussions, that's not a normal response. You've got somebody that is literally dazed and confused.
Yeah, and I take it from the expert who's had quintuple concussions there. Yeah, I just think this may have come down to a client control issue. You know, this guy comes into your office, sounds like a very interesting case. It continues to evolve, and then it's past the point of no return because you have somebody that's not insured on these kinds of things. Check your homeowner's insurance, folks. Most people are covered for things like this. Negligence when out and about. Not Gwyneth Paltrow. This is going to be a self-insured situation. He wants a big payday, and it's cruising to trial. It's just an anomaly. Interesting to watch, though, and I appreciated all of the wackiness that ensued, and I think the right result. Let's take a break. We've got more to talk about.